the fact that professors really do not know everything. I think it's really important for you. I think at least my students are keenly aware of that fact, and that's something that I think you keep in mind. There are no sacred cows. We're running a little bit behind schedule, which is great, and I mean that in a non-sarcastic way. I think what we'll do now is I'll give the floor up to Cynthia Watson and the CAPS alums, and I'll let Hyan set us up audio-visually for the first of the two afternoon panels. So can I ask you all to please come on up? Thanks.
I will go ahead and get us started. You've heard my name today, and you may say, who is this person? We've never seen her. Well, some of you have. But I'm Cynthia Watson. My regular day job is I'm a professor of strategy at a place you've probably never heard of, but you might be wanting to ask about it later. I teach at a place called the National War College, which is your National War College in Washington, D.C. In the spring, I believe it was March of 2012, I got an email message I almost didn't open because it came to my personal account, and it was from somebody I'd never heard of, and I was intrigued by the subject line, which said, teach at Cornell. I'm not an idiot, so I said, well, I'll go ahead and open this, and it was the opportunity to teach a seminar on U.S.-Chinese relations Thursday afternoons to the CAP students. I have enjoyed every minute of it. It's great to see these students here now. It was wonderful to hear their experiences this morning. And I would just like to thank Mr. Zach for his comments, and I want to underscore everything that he said, but for the new China hands, I want to underscore it in a slightly different way. I work in an institution where it matters every day what kinds of decisions are taken by people in the U.S. government, because it can have long-term implications that will affect all of us. It is imperative that you all not only take this opportunity to learn about China, but to take this opportunity and think about what Mr. Zach said about going back and reinvesting in our society's world. And that's my charge to you, because I think it really it does matter. Let me stop gabbling here. I make up new words all the time. And let me turn it over to my panelists. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, and then we've got about 4 topics that we'll explore in the next hour.
I'm Jonathan Ray. I graduated from CAPS in 2009, and I don't know if we have slides or not. After Cornell, I studied at Brigham Young University and as well as the Monterey Institute of International Studies, and focused mostly on security issues, specifically all things nuclear. So if anyone wants to geek out about physics and nukes, I'm your guy. And I've branched out into other strategic issues as well. So that's my kind of the security focus.
Max Rothkopf. I was in the inaugural class of CAPS in 2008. After I left school, I went back to Beijing for about 4 years and worked in real estate private equity there, investing mostly in Tier 2 cities across China and residential development projects. I then moved to Abu Dhabi and was sort of doing pan-Asia real estate private equity for them for a couple of years, and I'm now an MBA student at Harvard Business School. I definitely am one of the CAPS guys that was more on the commercial side of things, and initially at least less on the policy side, although that's changed over time. So I guess I represent the business crowd of CAPS people a bit.
I'm Justin Orr. I also graduated from the inaugural class in 2008. I was classmates with Max. after graduating from CAPS, I worked in Beijing for 3 years as a risk consultant. I then went to Berkeley. I got interested in technology transfer and indigenous innovation, so I wanted to study IP and technology transactions at Berkeley. I'm now a lawyer at Sullivan and Cromwell. Previously in Palo Alto, I just moved to New York a week ago. So I'm still getting my feet firm. I would say originally I was more on the policy side of CAPS, but now I'm just a lawyer.
Okay, what I'd like to start with is a very obvious question, but I'd like each of you to take just a few minutes and give us a sense of how, looking back, not the perspective that these guys are at right now, whether they're about to graduate or graduate a year from now, but how did the CAPS program impact where you are today?
I can start. There's a theme that people have touched on in different ways, and that is that just trying to look at things from China's perspective. And I think that that is underappreciated, especially in DC, where it's really easy just to say, well, of course they would do it this way, or of course they're thinking that. Well, not necessarily. And so what was really great about CAPS was being able to learn that perspective by spending time over there, having professors who appreciated the value of that, and having professors who were flexible enough. My senior year, I did an independent study with Xu Xin, looking at Chinese perspectives on non-traditional security topics like nuclear nonproliferation. And so just really getting that perspective and being committed to understanding it, that was probably the greatest focus of the CAPS program from my perspective.
Yeah, for me, I think, it goes back to why I was originally interested in CAPS. I guess when I was growing up, my dad spent a lot of time in China because our family had manufacturing operations in Shenzhen and an office in Hong Kong, so he was over there every month for a week or so for several years. And I was lucky enough to go with him on some business trips over to China, and I became, really interested. I loved Hong Kong, and I was interested in from the business perspective. I think what changed is when I came to Cornell, I thought I would study economics or finance or something, and then I would just study Chinese as well on the side. But by taking the CAPS major, I got a lot more interested in actually the other side beyond just business in China. And when I went over there, I realized, I probably thought I was going to work for a GE or some company like that and have manufacturing operations that would be good to speak Chinese. But when I got over there, I realized the opportunity was in China. Particularly, I realized that I liked the real estate market there, but I thought that, I never would have reached that conclusion if I had not taken the CAPS major. I wouldn't have gone to China for a semester. I was kind of against it at the time. But the second I got over there, I realized, A, it was a lot of fun, and B, I should actually spend a lot more time there. And then, I never would have assumed I would spend 5 years total over there. But I wouldn't be here today if I had.
I came to Cornell interested in policy generally, and I think I came to the realization quickly in high school, I think, that you live in the world's maybe dominant power. The most important thing you can probably study is the world's greatest rising power. And much like Max, I think, well, mine's a little different maybe. I really wasn't good at language, or at least I didn't think I was in high school, and I thought I could kind of get away with just studying China and US-China relations without taking Chinese, without going to China. But I got interested in the CAPS program, and I realized how wrong that was, and that I really had to take Chinese to be able to understand China, and that I definitely had to live there. So I think without taking CAPS, I wouldn't have necessarily moved to Beijing right away, and I think without doing that, I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you are interested in China and China's place in the world. You really need to get there to understand it. And yeah, I guess the question is how it's influenced me from there. I mean, I don't live in China anymore, and sometimes I wish I did, because it's easy to forget. I mean, it's a dynamic place. It's changing all the time. But still, I think having the experience of having lived there for a long time, you understand dynamics more, I think. I mean, now I do a lot of licensing negotiations, for example, between Chinese and American companies, and I feel like I have a better understanding of the interests and concerns of both sides now.
As you think about the program, understanding that all academic programs evolve, is there something you think could have been done differently? Is there something you would have liked to have seen added? The way we ended the panel with the students this morning was their suggestion. This is a good place to get your retrospective look of what would have been useful for you. What else would have you like? Understanding everything is a zero-sum game. So somebody will have to go away probably to add something else. But any thoughts on that? Any of you?
I think so.
Don't have to go down
I'll
the
start.
line, you know.
Yeah, I'll start. So I think one big change that's already happened that I think is a great change is now you have the option to take your Beijing semester as a junior. When we started, it was fall back to Cornell, but fall of junior year, DC, back to Cornell, and then you had to do your Beijing semester fall senior year, and that really broke things up. I like the idea of kind of doing them back to back. I think that's important for recruiting purposes and kind of figuring out what you're going to do. Obviously, the flip side of that is if your Chinese isn't already excellent, which sounds like many of you guys are coming in now with pretty high-level Chinese, you know, you're going to get less out of that Beijing semester. So, I mean, that's a big change that I think is great for you guys. Another thing that I think could be done is I think the opportunity to take classes, I don't know if you guys can do this now actually, but take classes with Beida students while at Beida I think would be a big opportunity. It's a great resource to be at Beida, and everybody's very impressed when you tell them that you spent a semester there. But you know, we had a great program. We actually we took a class with Jia Qingguo. That was one of the most valuable things I think we did there. But to be able to have another class maybe with Beida students would have been helpful.
Yeah, one funny thing, I guess, not totally related to the question, but is at business school now, I think about something like 20% of my classmates there are from China. And because Beida and Tsinghua are so, you know, they just dominate the market of high-end students there, I would say. I have many more classmates from Peking University at business school than I do from Cornell. So if I go to the Cornell club, there's like 20 people. If you go to the Peking University club, you got 100 people in the room. So it's kind of a funny side effect.
I don't have that problem. So we're all up here. We're graduates of the first 2 years, and we've already had Mao quoted extensively. So I'm gonna move on to dumb. At this point, we were still crossing the river by feeling for stones and trying to figure out how to make this program work. And that was really, it was both challenging but also really cool to be a part of. So I was an office assistant my final semester here, working with Xu Xin, trying to brainstorm ways to improve the program, and we came up, of course, that was a long list when you ask people, hey, what do you want to see different? Turns out everybody has an opinion. But what's really cool to listen to you guys, it sounds like there's a lot more flexibility based on your interests, being able to accommodate them. There wasn't a minor back in our day. And being able to choose which semester you go abroad with. So I think that kind of flexibility is great. And if you can add the flexibility of taking classes with actual enrolling in the Beida classes, I think that'd be great. I took a crisis management class at Nanjing University, and you know, the professor, I didn't learn so much from the professor, but rather from students listening to them talk about how they view the Cuban Missile Crisis and how they view the EP3 incident. That's where I got the most insight.
I'd like to spend just a second asking you each to talk about a theme that Mr. Zach talked a lot about, and that is the role of public service. And you can say, well, I'm not in public service. I don't really understand how that's got to do with me. But you've had other classmates. Do you think that this program really, based on what you've seen now several years hence, is fulfilling his dream of it being China Hands? Or is there something along that line that we could jigger with to make it more public service? Or should we redefine what we mean by public service?
So my internship at DC was with the State Department. It seems like a lot of you guys have that opportunity now. I really thought that I was going to graduate and work as a foreign service officer for a while. I think that changed for me ultimately because I met foreign service officers, and it did seem that, yeah, I mean, they would come to China for 2 years, and they would spend their first year learning Chinese, and then they would spend another year there, and like I felt like living there for 1 year meant like we were all more of experts than the State Department foreign service officers. So it became maybe not that much. I think that I was interested in doing it. I think the program certainly allows you to do it. I think I could have done it. I think it sounds like a lot of you guys are now working for the State Department. If that's something the program can kind of funnel you into. I mean, when I was there, my boss's boss was then Deputy Assistant Secretary Tom Christensen. So he's obviously involved in the program. But those kinds of opportunities, I think, funneling you into government work would be one idea. But to your point about expanding the definition of public service, I think, you know, having graduates who understand both, you know, like China's perspective in any line of work, I think is still a service.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, for me, I've always been interested in being in business, but I think that, you know, since I've gained a pretty good understanding of China, having lived there for so long, and, you know, I had a Chinese girlfriend I lived with for many years, and know a lot about her family as well, and sort of learned a lot about the culture. You know, I teach people back here stuff that they're not expecting to learn, and I think, you know, like I'm in business school talking in front of 100 of my classmates, and I'll talk about something totally, you know, against the grain of what everybody else thinks. You know, we'll be talking about some Chinese government decision, and they're all saying, oh, these are tyrannical decision, extremely, you know, not democratic, all this other stuff. And I'm able to go in and, you know, I think the Chinese people that are in my class say something, and that's one perspective, but it's sort of taken with a grain of salt by other people. As an American, when I say something that's closer to what they say, or at least somewhere in between, and sort of look at some of the positives on the way things are done over there, people are really interested with that. And I think it sticks with them. They ask me after class, Max, that's interesting that you think of that way. I've never heard somebody say that way. And I think that just by, you know, by being amongst other smart and influential people and just explaining things to them, or at least giving you a more informed perspective theoretically than they might have on it, I think, you know, you're helping with just the broader social understanding, you know, that's within people in America. There's not that many people still. It's a lot better than it was then, but there's not that many people that understand what's going on. And I think just by being somebody that does understand and talking about it, that's helpful.
So I think there are two different conversations to have about public service with China stuff. One is, if you want to do government stuff, then that can be a very long, tedious process requiring a lot of patience, and we can talk about that after this because I have a lot of thoughts on it. But it is worth the hassle from what I can tell. And then two is that if you're not necessarily govvied or fed, you still have a great role to play in terms of contributing your perspective. Like Max was saying, that you can speak in the business community and tell them things that they just don't understand. Because I do think that there's a lot of tendency just to make assumptions about China or any other country that they're not expert with, instead of actually take the time to understand it. And so where I feel fortunate where I am, I've been in a position where I can write things that they might be an irritant to the US side or the China side, but it's my understanding of the ground truth in China. So just a quick example, my neutron bomb report over there has been well received by a lot of people, and I think the Chinese were pretty happy with it. Some US stakeholders, not so much. This past week, my company wrote a piece on a PLA unit hacking Southeast Asian countries. Chinese response, not so positive. US, rah. So it's really just being unafraid to just say what your honest to God perspective is about what is going on in China and why the different groups in China act the way they do. And I think if you can do that in any field, then that in itself is a public service and contributes to the new type of great power relations, whatever we're going to call the future.
A couple of you have talked about communicating what you saw to others. Obviously, writing is one major way to do that. Well, what are some of the other ways that you think Max talked about your interactions with people at Harvard Business School, but what are some of the other ways, kind of top to bottom, that you think you've been able to bring your experiences forward to give to other people and perhaps either spur them to show an interest or have a better understanding? Because one of the things that came up this morning was this idea of networking a little more amongst students across the country, or potentially creating publications. How can you give them some ideas for the future, at the same time give Cornell some ideas of things that make sure we pass on to subsequent classes that are going through this program?
I mean, I guess maybe not 100% direct response, but the way that I like to think about it is I always think as a CAPS graduate and somebody with the skills, some understanding of China and some language skills and things like that, is I always try to position myself, and this is mostly from, because I'm thinking about it from a business standpoint, but it also extends beyond that, as I try to position myself as a bridge, whether it's between, in my business, it'd be between the capital in the US and the investment opportunity in China, or between the capital in China and the investment opportunity in the US. But it's the same thing, outside of work as well. I try to be a bridge between something that people aren't understanding and, and something that's being misinterpreted and what's actually happening. And it is true that both sides have a good, argument on their side a lot of the time. But I feel like if you can, nobody really trusts an impartial juror of any kind, and I try to be that person. It's hard, but I think there's a lot of different methods for communicating it. I mean, I just try to speak up loudly at dinner parties and at, I just try to let my opinion be known about it. And I think I have a reputation for the place I go as being a China guy who knows stuff about China. And so people are, oh, you're the China guy, and then they ask you, and that's the way it works. I mean, I don't publish any business related stuff, but I still think it gets out there pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'll give you a specific example, I guess. So I work a lot now with drafting and negotiating contracts for both licensing and M&A deals. And the two sides can fight a lot about things like representations and warranties. And when it comes to IP, a lot of it's going to be how do we share, how do we do a deal where we're going to share some source code? These are very sensitive things to share, but how are we going to protect it when when either the counterparty is a Chinese party or your client is the Chinese party? And I think going to the heart of the concerns for each side, I talked about this a little earlier, is very helpful because you'll just you get into this yes no on both sides, just reinserting language and then taking it out. But I feel like being able to, as Max kind of said, be a bridge between the two sides and try and explain the concerns of the other side so that you can actually redraft language so that both sides are a little happier. It's it's hard to explain, but that does come up quite often. And I also don't publish papers about China anymore, but I did actually at when I was a consultant in control risks. And, I guess it's just the experience. So the other side of that, though, is that's kind of how it's useful in your work. But I think in your life, it's also just very interesting. People are always intrigued. The experience is so rich. This is going on top. I'm sorry, but the experience of living in China and studying China for the opportunities that you guys have right now make you just more of an interesting person, and that helps you in job interviews. It helps you just getting to know people. And I feel like a lot of the people that I know now, I have a richer life because of the experience.
Yeah, I would emphasize that hugely. I mean, I always thought my dad was really cool because when he graduated from Cornell in 1967, he went and worked in Europe for 10 years all over the place. And he doesn't do anything to do with Europe anymore, and hasn't for years. And but he's just cooler now. I mean, he just knows. He just tells stories about when he was living in Italy or Spain or France, and you know what I mean. It's just fun, and other people think he's very, and he has a good understanding of other cultures. People respect that, and I think, I like to think that I'm moving in the direction of being something like that too. And if people at business school, I mean, they're not that everybody used to have a good job at McKinsey or did something very impressive, but not that many people did something different and interesting, and it's everybody's interested to hear about what you did in China.
Jonathan, how did you go about publishing the piece that's back here? One of the things that they won't have done yet is they won't have been in a position, in most cases, to publish. Did you go on doors in Washington? Did people come to you? How do you actually go about getting something out there, getting an idea? Because I got newsflash, Washington thinks it has a bunch of China specialists. Right? So there are many, as was said this morning, immediate voices, some of which are credible, some of which are less than credible. But how did you distinguish yourself so that somebody would say, wow, this is something I really want to pursue?
That's a great question. So just a couple of quick backgrounders. One, I agree there are a lot of self-proclaimed China experts. And whenever you're in a meeting and there's a guy from Office of Secretary of Defense saying, if there's one thing I know about the Chinese is that they know their Sun Tzu. Here's some.
There's a whole list of things like that.
Yeah, but we can do. And in that accent too. And then the quick background of the piece over there is on China's neutron bomb program. A neutron bomb is a special kind of nuclear weapon. And I wrote that as my thesis in my master's program out in California. And that's where it kind of ended. But and the way that it got to where it is now is that when I moved to DC, I was working for a company that promptly went belly up. And I found myself in DC without a job. So that's always a fun experience. And so at that point, you're just banging on doors, asking everybody you've ever worked for, saying, hey, I'm in DC, I'm just looking to meet people and see what's out there. Because a lot of the good jobs that are out there are not advertised. You can't just go online, Monster, or even USAJobs.gov is a special place. So you really have to ask, you have to be persistent and treat it like a daisy chain where if this person says no, all right, who else should I ask? This person says no, okay, who else should I ask? And you keep rolling down the line. And for me, I was really blessed to meet Dr. Philip Saunders over at National Defense University, and we made an agreement where he would pay me less than the standard sum to turn my thesis into that publication, and in exchange, take me around to different places to brief it. So I got to brief those findings at State Department, different intelligence groups, a couple different think tanks, and so I got exposure, and I met people at Defense Group Inc., where I am now, and that's where I landed. That's where I'm working today, just incredibly happy and continue to learn stuff. And so that's kind of the theme for, the two themes that really jumped out for me from that experience are that, well actually I'll focus on two. One is that there are a lot of great people in the China field in DC or anywhere you go. I mean, you guys are all freaking bubbly and friendly. don't
You don't
lose
see
that.
him on Thursday, Sundays it doesn't happen.
But there are a lot of great people, and when you have a boss who has your back and is willing to take the time to invest in you and cares about your professional development, you know, just take a bullet for the guy, like work hard, do your best, and this is stuff I don't have to tell you guys. But in DC, like that is really important. And then, yeah, I guess that's kind of the main thing. Just it really is about being persistent and honoring that when you're working with good people, be good to them, they'll be good to you, and you have each other's backs, and it's a really good feeling.
I'm going to flip that on its head. Not everything in the China field today is warm and fuzzy. There is an argument that can be made, and again, Mr. Zach referred to it earlier, that there's some pretty profound negativity out there right now about China. The report that your organization put out this week didn't engender a lot of good feelings on the Chinese side, that only enhanced some people who are very skeptical of the relationship with China right now. What are some of the downsides? Let's lay it out for them so they understand. To have studied in China, you talked about how hard it is sometimes to get a job. You've got to be persistent. What are some pitfalls that they need to be aware of? Because I know you're wonderful, I know you're Cornell graduates to be, but hey, this is about the real world as well. Any observations?
Yeah, so I think, like I said earlier, I think the most valuable thing that you guys can do after TAPS, I realize some people have different plans, but I think you should really go move to China and live in Beijing. And there's or you know, wherever, it doesn't have to be Beijing, Taiwan, something. But the jobs aren't so set. You know, you're going to have a lot of classmates that junior year have an internship and senior year kind of know where they're going to go, and they've got some Wall Street job lined up. But I think if you're going to take the opportunity to move to China, it's really a lot harder to just be funneled into something. We also graduated during the financial crisis. I think you had a job right away. I did not. So I just moved to Beijing. I was a teacher for about a month